let me start with introduction and welcome everybody to our February's DecisionCAMP session. And today we will listen presentation by Vincent van Dijk from Netherlands. And Vincent is going to talk about decision modeling in the area of different legislation. And last year during DecisionCAMP, Vincent made very interesting presentation sharing their experience with the Dutch Environmental and Planning Agency. And today I asked him specifically if he shares not only the achievements, and they quite essential, but also the problems they faced when they applied DMN tools and DMN-based technology for modeling legislations. And so we expect it would not be only Vincent talk, but more discussions about this. And before Vincent will start, I just want to tell you, in most cases, when we deal with decision modeling, we almost, maybe in 70% cases, we actually deal with kind of some legislations. It's not necessary they come from government, or for example, they could come from rules particular for this company, or from Department of Insurance, or from banking policies, and they, or if it's, for example, I dealt with this over my professional life many times with similar situation, and that's one of the most popular topic. And so any practical considerations, especially from people who actually implemented this, would be very interesting. And I think you can expect more questions after this, and your presentation would be downloaded many times after this. So let's start. And Vincent, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Yes, in applying DMN to model and execute the legislation, we've encountered quite some challenges. And well, during this presentation, I will guide you through the challenges, but also I will explain how we solved the challenges. And hopefully we have a discussion afterwards. So I tried to end earlier. We have till 7 or 1 o'clock, and we have some time for discussion. But first, well, I'm Vincent van Dijk. Currently, I'm working for Rijkswaterstaat as a product owner. Well, the product is, of course, the business rule solution, which is part of the digital system. Well, in this, I'm an independent rule governance consultant at Ferocious, but for quite some time now, I've been involved in this very interesting program where we do well, a lot of interesting things with knowledge management. Well, during this hour, although we've given already the presentation during DecisionCAMP about the digital system, I will do a short introduction on the Environmental Law and Planning Act, of course, about the digital system, but then we'll go to the challenges we saw when applying, executing decision and model annotation models. If there is time, but I rather do the discussion, I'll do a little demo as well of the portal. So let's see how we will go in the next hour. The goals of the new act, because it all starts with new legislation. The current legislation, well, it consists of 26 laws and a lot of further regulations. So it's a quite scattered legal landscape where every law has its own starting point, its own procedures, its own requirements, which, well, it makes the legislation very complex for all the people who have to work with the legislation, let alone with the people who want to use the legislation. So who want to do a project in the environment, who want to build a house or cut a tree or whatever they want to do, building a road, building a building. And well, that really the complex law well, it is a very big problem at the moment. So that's why the government decided to replace the 26 laws with one Environmental and Planning Act. And there is, well, also a change in regime in the law. The law is now very strict. Nothing is allowed unless, and that changes to a more benevolent regime where a lot is allowed if you follow certain rules. So that's a change. There is also the change that there is much less plans under the current law. So the legislation will be more transparent and, well, not at the least, also the one-stop shop is also a big improvement for the citizens and the companies, because through only one portal, everything is possible to do, and only one authority will make the decision in the end. And, well, this is not possible without also setting up a complete new digital system. Just like the scattered legal, the scattered legislation, also there is a quite the systems are standalone systems, and there is not a coherent digital system. It is all you have to really find your way through the environmental law and the environmental systems that support the law at the moment. And the digital system will bring a one-stop shop. And, well, it is one of the major points of the new of one of the major goals of the new legislation, also the digitalization of the information provision. It is explicitly part of the law as well. Well, this digital system, and that's where it's interesting for us, is that it is completely rule-driven. So everything you do in the system is based on the rules that are provided by different legal authorities. So if I want to do a project, and if I want to know if I need a permit or not, then that conclusion is driven by the facts that I provide to the system. And these facts, they are needed because the rules that are part of the rule-based system, well, they take the conclusion based on the legal grounds. Well, everything is basically rule-based in the system. And, well, the problem is that we need the rules. Then we, as the central organization that is responsible for setting up the system, we do not make the rules. That is the responsibility of the lawmakers. But we will see more about that later. Well, a quick overview. This is you see the rule-driven solution is a central part of the digital system. Well, I mentioned it is rule-driven, so everything that is done in the portal is based on the rules that are part of the rule registration. There's much more of this. Jacob already mentioned it in the full presentation that was given by me and my colleague in the last DecisionCAMP. In that presentation, we will tell a little bit more about the digital system. So if you're interested, please, well, watch it. And if you have any questions, we'll hear about that. We will hear about that. But for now, the digital system, there are a lot of challenges. It sounds very easy, translating legislation into rules that can be executed by a rule engine, a rule-driven system for an end user, so that automatically an answer appears based on facts. But in practice, it isn't that simple, because we have one portal and one decision, but we have more than 400 rule makers who are responsible for providing the rules. If I'm going to perform a certain activity, then rules may be set by my municipality, but also by the central government, and maybe also by the province. And they all have to come together in the portal. So that's quite a challenge, how well, do we do that? How do we coordinate that? Next to that, the organizations themselves are responsible for the translator legislation into the models, but without the loss of information. And also, they are not that experienced with decision rule management. So we try to do as less technical translations as are necessary, because with every translation, information will get lost or will be translated incorrectly. And that can, of course, affect the conclusion that the decision that is taken in the portal. You do not want.
Vincent, can I ask you who is end user here?
The end user is that is the people. So the end user is everybody who wants to do something in the environment. So if I'm going to rebuild my house, then I use the portal to find out if I need a permit. But also decision makers use the portal to see which rules are relevant. But I think for the goal of this presentation, see the end user as the general public who wants to do something and wants to know if they need a permit or not, and which permit applications are applicable.
And the rule makers can modify the rules?
Yeah, the rule makers are responsible to provide the rules and also to change the rules if the legal basis changes.
Okay.
But that is quite a challenge. So how do we get the rules into the system? And also because the people who make the rules are not that experienced with rule management. Next to that, also, although there is the new law is more transparent than the former 26 laws, still it is quite a complex legal system because we have a single decision about a permit, but that can be steered by multiple rules from different lawmakers. We call that the legal layer cake, because we have in the Netherlands a layered system of government. We have a central government, we have provinces, we have municipalities, and because we have also a lot of water, we have water boards, and they all can set rules, and all the rules can be relevant for me as an applicant who wants to know if I can do something without a permit or not. For instance, if I'm going to build, if my house is near a river or water, which is also in a nature area, then there are building requirements from the central government and also from my municipality. But there are also requirements from the province regarding the nature. And there are requirements from the water board because I am near a river. So that is quite a challenge to get all the different rules from the different layers together and to take a single decision in the portal. Well, then we have, that is the legal challenge. But next to that, we have also some technical challenges. We have counted that, user experience and executing a stateless rule engine do not always go well. A rule engine, it comes to a decision based on facts, and it isn't really interested in the sequence or the order of the facts. It just needs facts. But as from a user viewpoint, they expect a logical dialogue. It is comfortable if you first start with some general questions and dig more into the subject, so that the more difficult questions will be asked later, and if possible will not be asked at all because they might not be relevant because of earlier questions. So that are also quite some technical challenges where we had to find a solution. So how did we do that? Well, the first thing that we are as a system as a whole is standardization, and that is not only in lawmaking but through the whole chain. And we call it from law to portal. Oh, sorry about it. Because it all starts with lawmaking, and well, that is done based on a certain standard for official publications. Then the legal rules have to be translated into the format that the rule engine will understand. And also there we have set up a new standard, that is the standard for applicable rules. And well, if I've done my application, then of course it has to go back to the government to decide whether I get my permit or not. And also there we have a standard, that's a standard for applications. And all these three standards, well, there are some elements that are dependent on each other. So for instance, the standard for applicable rules uses concepts that are defined in the standard for official publications. And also the standard for applications, well, it uses elements from the standard of applicable rules. So that is the first thing we have done. We've looked at standardization in order, well, to bring the 400 authorities together. But the focus of today is, of course, the standard for applicable rules, which is a new standard for decision modeling. Of course, it's not whole new because it is based for a large part on DMN. But it consists of a functional specification. There is an information model. But what's important of this standard, that there are three pillars, and they are very important. We'll discuss them in the next slides. The first pillar is DMN, and well, that's the interesting part, because if we look at legislation, then legislation is all about making decisions based on certain legal grounds. As said, do I need a permit or not? Well, that is a decision. That is yes, or that is no. And in order to know if I need a permit, well, then I have to provide facts, and the fact can be about what I'm going to do, why I'm going to do it, where I'm going to do it can be important, how can be important. In legislation, there are all rules about those legal grounds. So, well, that sounds familiar, of course, because also DMN is all about decisions and inputs. So if you look at the structure of legislation, well, then it can be quite easily translated into DMN, because in DMN models we can fairly good reflect the structure and also the contents of the legislation. And next to that, because it is a structured way to model your legislation, it can also quite easily be read and reviewed by legal experts, which is very important, because in the end the legal experts need to validate the legal models to make how do you say it, to be sure that the legal requirements are reflected in the model. And also even better, next to that, well, we use a rule engine, and that is capable of directly execute DMN. So, well, I mentioned the fact that we like to prevent as much translations as possible. With using a rules engines, we directly can execute DMN rules without the need to translate them into a more technical language another rule solution would require. So we have direct execution of the specification by the rule makers into the portal. That's of course a major improvement. The second pillar, that is the, as we call it, the layer model. And the layer model, well, that is based on the thought that there are different types of rules. We have decision rules, which are used to translate legislation and make a decision based on the legal documents. But that is not enough because, as we said, legislation consists of decisions and legal grounds, but we need to provide the legal grounds with value from the real world. We need real world facts to be sure to know if the legal grounds will be met. For instance, if the legal ground states that I am not allowed to build a wall thicker than 1 meter, then I need to go to the end user to know how big the wall is that he's going to build. Or for instance, if the legal ground states that it is not allowed to build in an archaeological area, then we need to know if you are in an archaeological area or not, based on the location. So that is where the data rule layer comes into place, because in the data rule layer, the real world facts are connected to the legal grounds part of the decision rule layer. Well, as I said, also the user experience is important. So we also need a way to define the way the portal, the behavior of the portal also needs to be specified, because the portal is not only completely rule driven, also the behavior of the portal is driven by the rules that are specified by the rule makers. So the rule makers not only need to think about the decision rules they have to translate based on the legal documents and where they get the real world data from, but also they need to think about the interaction and the behavior of the system. So that is why we have set up the layer model, which well, places each type of rule into a separate layer. And well, if we start with the most important layer, which is the legislation layer, the decision rule layer. Yeah. Then we see an example here of a translation of the legal rules regarding regarding your monument. So if you live in a monument and you want to make changes to the monument, then well, there are all kinds of rules that are in place. So the first thing I want to know, and that is part of the main conclusion, do I need a permit or not? So you see in the red square, the conclusion is permit. It says in Dutch vergunningplicht. And in order to be able to deduce that conclusion, we need facts. And the facts are derived from the legal grounds. So that is how the legislation is modeled. You first decide which decisions are necessary to take. So in this case, the decision about the whether you need a permit or not, and then well, it is then for that decision, well, more on an intermediate level. Which sub-decisions may be necessary to take in order to derive the conclusion, and then in the end, as the input data, the legal grounds are connected, which is the lowest level of legislation. Because next from the legal ground, well, it's basically the fact that the legal decision needs. So it's all in Dutch. Sorry for that, but you see, for instance, the legal ground that needs effect from the law, and we ask here some questions, which are also part of the law. So this is done by analysts. So there is no automation of legal legislation into a DMN model. Yeah, of course, there is you can do an analysis first, so we can indicate into the legislation, what will be the legal ground. We can indicate in the legislation what will be the decisions, so that makes the life of the rule maker easier, using decisions and using legal grounds.
May I ask you here, so this is a kind of a decision requirement diagram, and it was created by a business analyst. So this is a person who looks on document, understands document, and transforms this natural language text to decision requirement diagrams and builds decision tables like you demonstrated in the right top corner. Is it correct?
Yeah, that's correct, and that's done in cooperation with more of a legal analyst who first indicates in the legislation what are the decisions and what are the legal grounds needed to take the decisions, or even what are the decisions that are necessary to take another decision. So this is a cooperation of legal analysts and more business rule analysts.
So what kind of skills required for this business analyst? They should be subject matter experts?
Well, of course, analytical skills. You need to be able to to understand the legislation and to know what are decisions and what are legal grounds, but also how to interpret the legislation, because there is, of course, a lot of ambiguities in legislations, and well, you need to solve them before you can make a model which needs to come to a conclusion.
And how to test this model? Who creates test cases?
The test cases, well, that is where the validation also comes into place. So that's why we need well, a good structure of the model, so the legal expert can recognize his legislation, so he can validate the DMN. Well, actually by actually looking at the DMN to see, okay, we have a conclusion and we have we need a permit. So how is that built up? It's built up because this decision needs to be true. This decision needs to be true. This decision needs to be true. And in order to make this decision true, I need these facts. So that's a manual validation. But of course, we also use the system to execute the model and see if well, by certain test cases, it comes to the right decisions. So it can be done manually, but it can also be automated. Okay, then we have, as I said, we have the difficult challenge of the layer cake, where we have to combine models from different sources, but which need to lead to a single decision, and that was quite a challenge, because well, every organization is responsible for his own rules. So every organization makes its own DRD, but how do we combine the DRDs into well, a single model that can be executed, which leads to a single decision? And that's where we use the invocation that is available in DMN. So an organization in mostly that is the central organization, the central authority, makes his rules, and part of the rules, well, the central government doesn't say anything about that rules, but leaves it to a different layer of authority. So the central government can make rules about rebuilding a monument, but can leave some of the rules to for instance, the community, where it can be the case that for the one community, the rules are set up different than for the other community. And then, well, based on the location, so based on where the end user performs his activity, then the correct rules are invoked by the central model. So if I live in Rotterdam, for instance, which is a major town in the Netherlands, then the rules of Rotterdam will become relevant. But if I live in Amsterdam, then the rules of Amsterdam will be invoked. And if I live in a city which has no extra rules for rebuilding the monument, then we have a default which is set by the central authority, and then that rules will be invoked. And that is all part of also of the standard of applicable rules. Well, where a large part specifies how you should set up the invocation. But it is quite an interesting concept, because well, you, as a central authority, well, you do not have to dig into all the local rules, but you leave that to where it belongs, which is the local rule maker. And by using DMN as a standard, well, we can be sure that the rules of the local authorities can be executed together with the rules of the central authority. So this is quite an important aspect of the standard of applicable rules. And it was from start also quite a puzzle how we could do that. Okay, but is that enough? So we can translate legislation into DMN, either into a single DRD, but also into a combined DRD. So that challenge, well, we have overcome it. But then we have further challenges because the user experience and execution do not always go well, because DMN models and also the rules rule engine and even legislation, they do not say anything about order or a logical sequence. Legislation and DMN are have both a declarative character, and maybe that's also why DMN is so suitable to use as a specification for legislation. But once we are going to execute the rules, well, then an end user expects some logical sequence. You don't want to start with the most difficult question. You want to start with more general information, or you want to start with a question that can have the effect that a lot of other questions will become irrelevant. So there we have quite a challenge. How do we build a comprehensive end user dialogue using DMN? Well, there we have the extension elements, and well, the extension elements they really can be used for the other layers. So I'll skip this. For instance, the data rule layer. We have to provide the legal grounds with facts, and the facts come from real-world data. And that is where, well, we have set up different kinds of data rules. So we can ask questions to an end user. We can use locations. We can use information from registries. So we can connect that to the legal grounds or the input data that is used in DMN. Here you see an example. We have the decision model again. We have the inputs, and then you see, well, but probably you can't read it, but these are all questions that can be asked to well, to provide the legal grounds with input. But also the location. So this is another model. So here there will be no interaction with the end user because of the location. Yeah, we can already make decisions. So if I, for instance, the archaeological area I've just mentioned, if I'm going to do something in an archaeological area, then it's not allowed by default. So if I know, if I'm in that area, then we can automatically make the decision without the need for any user interaction. I'll skip this. So this is an insight in the XML. You see the extension element, and in this case, there's a reference to the data rule. Well, then we have the interaction rules, which really steers the behavior of the portal. So think about the behavior, about grouping questions. So we want to have a logical set of questions that are asked for users. So then you can use a rule group. You can use a classification, and the classification is then used by the portal well, to know where information should be asked. And you can even define also the input type, if it needs to be text or is it text area. So well, it helps the user experience a lot by using the interaction layer. But of course the lawmaker has to think about it. So as you said, as you just asked, who is making the rules? Then it's not only the legal people together with the business rule and specialists who make the rules, but we also need people from communication to provide input about how the user experience of the user interaction should be. So it's a multidisciplinary task of making the applicable rules for the system.
Just from previous slide, can we summarize that you use rules to generate dialogue and UI, like text area, for example?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I come to that now. So we use the DMN, we use the extension elements for the. But is it enough? We have saw that DMN and DMN extension elements, well, they really provide for a rich specification, but also the rule engine has to understand it, and also the portal has to understand it. So we encountered the problem that we needed a kind of orchestration to give, well, to provide a natural dialogue with the end user. And a natural dialogue is, well, a logical sequence of questions, as we have mentioned, and only relevant questions. You don't want to ask a lot of facts to the end user that are not relevant for the decision, because that's how the rules engine by default works. You provide it with facts, and it comes to a conclusion. But you can also provide it with irrelevant facts, and it still will take a decision. So, therefore, we need the orchestration. And orchestration, well, there are three elements of orchestration. First, the priority is important. You have to decide which question needs to be asked first, because without a priority, the questioning will be random. Well, and then we don't have a natural dialogue with the end user. So the lawmaker, or the business rule specialist who is responsible for the interaction layer, he adds the priority to the questions. So he decides that well, a certain question should be asked first, so there will be a higher priority than another question. And with that priority, well, we can orchestrate the execution of the DMN inputs. So you see here an example of the portal, the rule groups we've just mentioned. And also the rule groups can be given a priority. So you can indicate which rule groups should be asked first. And within a rule group, questions can have a priority. So you can specify which question needs to be asked first. And then we have the start of a natural dialogue, because, well, you can ask the questions first that are the most important and are the most logical to be asked first in the dialogue. I'll skip that one. Another important feature is the dynamic questioning, because at first all facts are needed for the decision to be taken. Well, we can ask all the facts, but maybe not all the facts are relevant, because if I know already the value of a decision, then I may not need the other decisions anymore. So if I know that this decision will be an important one, then we specify that the questions for these decisions, for the facts for this decision, will be derived first. So if this decision is met, then we can take this decision. So we can take the decision about our permit, and then we no longer need this decision, and we don't need these facts. So the dynamic questioning, well, it makes sure that we only ask the questions to the end user which are actually relevant for the decision, and facts that are no longer relevant, well, they will go away, and you don't see them anymore in the portal. And if we do not add that type of orchestration, then in the portal, all these facts will be asked for the decision, and well, the end user, he doesn't know himself which facts are really relevant and which are no longer relevant. There is, of course, a disadvantage to this orchestration, because you need a pattern for dynamic questioning. Because if you do not use separate decisions and well, put all the rules into one big decision table, well, then you cannot use dynamic questioning, because you in a decision table, well, a decision is taken about a decision, and you cannot decide that some rules are no longer relevant. So that's why you need a pattern and use more separate decisions than you maybe would like to do so. And the third part for the orchestration is that we need a two-stage execution, because if we look at the execution, then there are two types of facts. There is a fact that can make another fact irrelevant, and a fact can be made irrelevant by a fact. And by adding this two-stage execution in every interaction with the user, we first decide which facts are relevant to make other facts irrelevant, and then go back to the end user for, okay, we have these questions left, answer them, and then again the two-stage execution is performed to help the dynamic questioning, making facts irrelevant. And that this is quite was quite a tough nut to crack in using DMN and using rules, because, well, by nature DMN and rules, well, they are not interested in sequence. They're not interested into irrelevant facts. They just take decisions based on facts. Well, an even harder nut to crack was when facts are changed, because, well, if you look at the several steps, then at a certain point a user changes his mind and wants to change a fact, but the rule engine already has decided that some facts were relevant to take the decision. And the rule engine does not know that those facts are not longer needed if another fact is changed. So what we had to add was a mechanism to decide again which fact is relevant or not. So for instance, if the third fact that is provided decides if further facts are needed or not, and in the beginning the user has in this case number 3 has to be true, and then we need 4, 5, and 6. So these facts are presented to the user, but then if he changes his mind and says now 3 is false, then we no longer need those facts and they should disappear, because it is very confusing for the user if they if they are still in the dialogue. So the orchestration, it helps to make those facts disappear, because we go back to question 3 and redecide what is necessary based on the changed fact.
So what mechanism you use? You mentioned here to define relevance.
This is a mechanism we have added to the rules execution. So we have the default rules execution, but we have added the mechanism of the dynamic questioning and the mechanism of irrelevant questions.
So what
with
is
the help
this?
Of
this
the
is
priority.
a Java program, or what is this?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, because among our attendees, there are people from semantic web community, and they use to solve this problem reasoning algorithms, and probably they will provide comments later, because it's and even inside rule engine, you said they're not interested, but internally all rule engines are interested in changes in facts and looking for state changes during the execution. But anyway, so it's clear you provided custom Java code to control relevance. And it's every time when something changed during the dialogue, this code would be executed.
Yeah, that's right. For every interaction, we decide again what is relevant and what is not, and which facts can disappear, and or which facts can reappear. For instance, if I change again my mind and make 3 true again, then of course we need 4 and 5 again.
Mm-hmm. You have 5 more minutes to
yeah, complete. I know, but we come to a conclusion after this part. So if you see the challenges again, then, well, how did we deal with that? The problem of the one portal and one decision. Well, we cope that by setting up a new standard. Well, the translation of legislation. Well, we have used DMN for that. Well, we still have the problem of the lack of knowledge about decision rule management, but by adding the layer model and by using DMN and by a lot of workshops, we have we try to make that knowledge more broader applicable. Well, the combination of models we have solved by using the invocation. The problem of user experience and execution, well, there we have the dynamic questioning, and well, the problem of well, making an end user dialogue based on declarative models. There we have the concept of orchestration. And now I've realized that I've been talking way too much, so we have a little time for the demo, I think.
No, go ahead, let's do it. It's very interesting to see.
Okay. So of course we want to see it all in working now. So if I do, this is in Dutch, sorry for that, but we cannot translate the portal. I'm now going to check whether I need a permit for a certain location for, in this case, well, the monument. So I'm going to rebuild my my monument, and well, based on that activity, all the rules are provided. And as I said, from start, all the facts that are necessary are well presented to the user. you see different rule groups with questions. But if we start, well, with the most logical question first, then the question is if there is a monument available. Well, and if I say no, then I'm almost done. And you see that, well, other groups, they fall away because the questions in those groups are no longer relevant to make the decision. Well, you see also further explanation, which is part of the interaction layer. There are some more examples of it. So I can answer all the questions.
This is dynamic questioning demo.
Yeah, you
right?
see the dynamic questioning. Yeah. Okay. So if you see that questions disappear.
Yeah, based on answer, you dynamically decide what to ask after this. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe we should switch to questions, and I see Denis, and probably just for you to know, a lot of products, decisioning platforms already include these dynamic dialogues. For example, Denis can tell you about some of them, and Smart Logic or Open Rules, they all have dynamic decisioning forms. And go ahead, let's start questions. Thank you. Thank you, Vincent. Denis?
Yes, so my understanding is that so you were faced with the fact that DMN is stateless, and you needed statefulness to do what you wanted to do, and that statefulness needed to be orchestrated. So you decided to do extension within DMN, use the DMN extension for that purpose. Have you considered using BPMN? Because in the triad of standards we created at OMG, the intention was that DMN would be stateless, and statefulness would be brought in either by BPMN if you need a prescriptive kind of environment, or CMMN if you need a declarative type of environment. So it seems like if you would have wanted to stay within standard as opposed to branch out of standards, you could have done all your dynamic questioning and all the statefulness either in BPMN or in CMMN, and then you would have remained within standard. So I'm just curious as to what was the motivation to stick to DMN and force feed DMN with things that it's not designed to do. What was the motivation for that?
Yeah, the motivation for that was that well, we don't have one organization that is responsible for making the rules. We have more than 400 for making the rules, and making those 400 organizations also responsible for providing the specifications for the orchestration would have made it way too complex. So we have focused the providing of we have focused on delivering the rules by the 400 organizations, and making the orchestration needed for the rules by ourselves. But that the point is that the orchestration also is specified by the 400 organizations using the interaction layer and using the data layer.
Yeah, no, I understand. So I understand that you wanted to have a single way of interacting with people, but as you mentioned, anyway, if you're interested, I'm going to be happy to have a side conversation with you on how you could achieve those two other layers, either with BPMN or CMMN, and get exactly the same benefits without having to force feed into DMN. But you have an existing running system, so probably by now this is all mute and smooth points about it. So
Yeah,
if you're
but
interested,
I'm very interested, but don't understand me wrong. But we don't force feed DMN. DMN is part of the standards of applicable rules, but we have added layers into the standard for applicable rules to execute DMN. So the layers help you. They are not an addition to DMN, but they are part of the standard. So the standard consists of the 3 pillars, which is the DMN for executing the decision rules. But we have the other 2 layers to steer the portal, and they are together with DMN.
Extension. Yeah, no, I understand that. You what you call standards here are really standard operating procedures. They're the way you get things done, which is fine. But the point I'm trying to convey to you is that the tip of that, which is DMN, is stateless. And you needed to push into DMN extensions so that you could provide both your statefulness for orchestration and also your backward chaining kind of behavior that you wanted to add.
Yeah.
And that could have been provided with BPMN and or CMMN is the only point I'm making. So that way you wouldn't have to use extension in DMN to do that. It would be captured in a standard interchangeable way with BPMN. Because right now your DMN model, the only thing that is interchangeable with other tool is the decision part. And when you exchange that with other tool, it's not going to behave at all like what you expect. It's going to behave as just what the DMN portion is, which is a stateless way. But in your case, again, we're talking theory. In practice, you have a system and it does what it needs to do. So wonderful, and that's a great solution. So that's why I said if you want to discuss those other things, it's more a theoretical discussion rather than a practical discussion. But what you've done is a very, very nice and interesting system.
Okay, more questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, please feel free. The most interesting part always discussion.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We left too little.
No, it's
time
okay. Let's talk. We're not under gun. We can talk more if people want to stay, or then people will listen to this when we record it. So more questions.
Yeah, I think the dynamic questioning is a very important issue. And I hear Denise saying you can do this.
Can you speak louder, Jan?
I hear Denise saying you can do the dynamic questioning and so on in BPMN. I don't like that. It should be part of executing a DMN model. Maybe not part of DMN, but maybe the specifications could be in DMN or the priorities. But why would we need BPMN to execute the DMN model?
So this is so within the OMG standard structure, the statefulness, DMN is stateless. So the statefulness is brought in by BPMN or CMMN. So
or by the execution mechanism.
Well, yes, but if you do that, you're outside of the DMN standard. So we can certainly change the DMN standard for doing different things, but the DMN standard is stateless. And all the vendors can do whatever extension they want and all this, but the part, and that's what I was getting at, the part that is interchangeable between tools right now is stateless. So everything that you add into extensions will still be transported, but will be ignored because the receiving tool doesn't know how to interpret the extension.
Yeah.
Stateless
is a fundamental feature, and it's nobody against stateless. But I think Jan's point is that what in the same what Vincent said. Every time when customer makes some changes, for example, answer this question, in this moment, certain service, and let's call this decision service, subscribes to this event, and it does, for example, this relevance calculation, and it knows what next question to ask, which questions to hide, or automatically answer to these questions, or maybe what else we need to ask, because some questions become irrelevant. And mechanism for this, you can use BPM, or maybe you can use something else. We use dialogue, rules-based dialogue. Smart Logic does very good job, and I saw form manager inside TriceAttack, right? And it's not, that doesn't use BPM for this. So there are, I want to switch a little bit to the most important thing. It's not about rules in general, it's legislation. And I always know that one of the biggest problems is translation from text legal document to formalized rules. And the biggest problem always is intermediate people. I've seen this in insurance industry, in patent enforcement industry. Every time when you have these legal experts who understand and interpret these rules, they become a serious problem. It's not only skills. And one of solution what I suggested in real life was the following. It's kind of revolutionary. We should ask rule makers, people who makes rules, already create the rules in the form that it's understandable and executable. And the most important thing, they should create test cases for the legislation. And what does, for example, let's look on the Department of Insurance in the United States. Every state has their own. And when they introduce their rules, they always come with at least 3 test cases for 3 types of insurance, single family or family of 4, and you can check, for example, auto insurance in different states. But because this is, right? This is the most important thing. Okay, what do you say?
Yeah, and
Agree, but remember that from the legal perspective, there is a desire, it is an actual stated desire that law should be interpretable. So it is something that they defend. They don't want to be explicit for all the cases in all the situations. They intentionally write laws in a way that is interpretable. So those two things are going one against the other.
Absolutely, so that's why so many challenges to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but some laws, for example, coming back to this insurance example, let's say you want to introduce new insurance policy in Massachusetts, and what it is, let's say it will punish smokers, some special surcharge for smokers, and that's is it legal or not? And they exactly the problem what Vincent pointed. There is a United States rules and there are Massachusetts rules, and Massachusetts rules could override or could be in conflict, and how to represent them. And this is one of the challenges. It's interesting how Vincent, real world experience in Netherlands, what he can provide what comments.
Yeah, and that's why we also have the layer model, because by recognizing that there are different types of rules, you can use the decision rule part explicitly for translating the legislation without polluting that model with all kinds of implementation, which is part of the data rule layer or the interaction rule layer. So you can well, nearly isomorphically model the legislation, and that's also why the legal experts, well, they can recognize their legislation in the decision rule layer.
But do you see a possibility in a relatively small country like Netherlands, when everything becomes so strict with rules, that people who make rules would follow certain standard, like we have a court or we have some specialized, you have 3 standards you mentioned. Why wouldn't they try to do, provide test cases and make it more formal, not in plain English, but in more formal language themselves? Do you see some problems here?
Now, one of the standards, the standard for the official publications, that's based on the machine interpretable, the machine interpretable. I always get mixed up with that word. Documents. So the texts, the normal texts, are enriched with objects which can be used in the execution. So that is quite a big step forward, because you have a more direct translation of the legislation, because in the execution you can use concepts which are already part of the legislation. Yeah, then the question, do you provide test cases with the legislation? Well, that's not part of the standard yet, but I know, for instance, that the Dutch customs standard, the Dutch, how do you say it? The Dutch authority, which is responsible for taxes, they have found a way to indeed deliver test cases also with legal specifications. So when executing models, they can directly test it.
Okay.
Can
Anybody
I add
else?
something to that? Can I add something to that? Because we've been doing this for such a long time. My experience with legal people is that a fraction of them, I don't know if it's 30% or 50%, find this very useful, and they would like to do it in a machine readable form and so on. And half of them probably don't like it because they live from the inconsistencies. That's one observation. And then the second observation, and I'm not sure about this, but if you make rules easy to automate, you open up the gates, because then you create the opportunity to create more rules. So if you make it too easy, certainly in the Netherlands and Belgium, we are heavily regulated countries, you just create more rules. It shouldn't be too easy to create and automate rules.
Interesting point.
I don't know if you agree, Vincent.
No, it's unusual.
Let's not make it too easy. Let's not make it too easy.
It's still too complex. Easy. Okay, anybody else? Just please.
Well, it is interesting. It is an interesting idea and that's also what we're doing with the digital system. When thinking about setting up your legislation, you can also think about that the legislation has to be executed, and that can that can make the execution more easy. So if you already know which concepts are needed for the execution, for instance, our activity and the legal grounds, and if you set them up in the legislation on a correct way, you will have less troubles translating legislation into a decision model, because the parts that you need are already part of the legislation.
Yeah, also I published this link to the word legal ML. If we have DMN, it does not mean that DMN is always the best final approach. For execution, probably yes, but there is a very, very strong, more scientific movement in RuleML community, and they created, and legislation is one of the targets for maybe the last 10-15 years, and they created a special standard, legal ML. And there are a lot of good results in this area. And what they do, they really analyze the documents. They do also natural language processing, and their destination is not directly executable language like DMN, but intermediate representation in form of legal ML, and legal ML allows to apply different reasoners, and these reasoners can set up all relationship between these variables ahead of time, and then we can apply probably DMN to solve particular problems, like, for example, allow or not allow building this particular building, and it should find the proper rules automatically, etc. Maybe this is intermediate step with different ontologies could be more productive in general when we deal with legislations. So this is, for me, it's two big topics. One of them is internal representation before you go to decisions. That's what Ron Ross always talks about, that lawyers, when they build something, they had a very deep knowledge. They knew what they're doing. And they not always thought about execution. They thought about some other factors. And what Denis mentioned, that it's not necessarily, it should be interpretable, it should not be strict to the execution. So it could be so many aspects here that it's a very interesting topic. Probably it will exist as a research topic for next 10 years. The fact that you in Netherlands created such practical system, that's one of the most impressive achievement. And you said last year that in July you will go to production, right? How is the progress with this?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the law has been postponed, so it will be October or maybe January next year, because well, the whole country has to get ready for this enormous operation, and well, not everybody is ready yet.
But
so
but you're technically ready for this, right? You already have in place, or some?
Well, the rule-based part.
Yeah.
Well, that's technically almost technically ready. There are, well, some bits and bytes that we need to do, but the system as such, well, it's there.
Okay, Vincent, hopefully you will keep all of us updated about your progress. Maybe next year you will tell us more what actually happens in real world. And,
hopefully, yeah.
And do we have any more questions? Not yet. Okay, so we do have more questions in reality in area of automation of different legal documents. And this Vincent gave us a good example of one possible approach. And hopefully we will hear more. Thank you very much, Vincent, and thank you everybody for attending the session.
Yeah,
see you next time. Bye.
Okay, goodbye.